Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission to explore new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before. Star Trek's creator, the late Gene Roddenberry, was quoted as saying that Star Trek was an attempt to say that humanity will reach maturity and wisdom on the day that it begins, not just to tolerate, but take a special delight in differences in ideas and differences in life forms. And maybe, if he lived long enough to see any of Star Trek Discovery, he'd have been less hopeful about the future.
Trust the math. More importantly, trust yourself.
So just how did the decade spanning that the once-loved science fiction universe Star Trek set its phasers to dumb? Well, get ready to cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war, because I'm Tom from Screen On Point and this is Star Trek to poorly go where everyone's gone before. Where science fantasies like Star Wars focus on the hero's journey, Star Trek is a science fiction drama which serves as an allegory for mankind's desire to better itself, with a focus on humanity's journey. Roddenberry describes Star Trek as being originally pitched as a kind of space western, with its episodes structured like a television western, often following the formula of a lone gunslinger attempting to solve a community's unique problems by the end of the episode. So its focus on problem solving as opposed to large-scale battles makes Star Trek comparable to the highbrow philosophical works of science fiction Isaac Asimov, with both attempting to tackle complex ideas and raise thought-provoking questions about the nature of humanity. And how this changed over time for the franchise can actually be illustrated by looking closely at how the character of Kirk evolved over time. Captain James Tiberius Kirk led the crew of the USS Starship Enterprise NCC 1701 on the 1966 show Star Trek. He was played with undeniable charisma by William Shatner.
Spock, I'm asking you, what's wrong?
An actor who appears to have learnt stress sense by watching a rebooting android recite the Klingon alphabet backwards.
Oh, it's never ah like in cop.
Although it might appear that Kirk was no more than a gung-ho, highly emotional captain who would solve conflict by either using his iconic double-fisted punch or attempting to sleep with every remotely human-looking alien woman he came across, there's arguably a depth to Kirk which made him more of an effective leader than anything you can see on Discovery. And this can be illustrated by looking at the Kobayashi Maru test. Kirk cheats by reprogramming the simulator so that he can save the ship whilst not endangering his crew, which has often been interpreted as indicative of Kirk's overconfidence in that he doesn't believe that he can lose.
As I recall, you took the test 3 times yourself. Your final solution was, shall we say, unique.
It had the virtue of never having been tried.
But it could also be argued that by refusing to play by the rules of the game, it highlights Kirk's quick wit and skill at improvising a solution, which makes him such an effective captain. His use of lateral thinking is displayed throughout the series, with one example of when he is able to beat the highly intelligent Vulcan Spock at a game of 3-dimensional chess by thinking outside of the box.
Your illogical approach to chess does have its advantages on occasion, Captain.
I prefer to call it inspired.
Despite being such a massive critical and commercial hit and bringing in a much wider audience to the Trekkie universe, if we compare this to Chris Pine's Kirk, who first appeared in J.J. Abrams' 2009 reboot, we can see how the complexities of Kirk's character have been watered down more than a bad bunch of Earl Grey.
Tea Earl Grey, hot.
From a malfunctioning replicator, thank you very much.
This is terrible.
Although Chris Pine's younger Kirk would eventually evolve to become the Kirk we all know and love, it can be argued that there are fundamental discrepancies between the two versions of the character that make them completely unrecognisable. The Kobayashi Maru test in the reboot is massively oversimplified to the point where it is simply about Kirk experiencing fear. This arguably completely misunderstands the original's complex moral dilemma, and also doesn't make much logical sense, as it would likely be difficult for the characters to experience true fear when they are fully aware that the situation they are in is part of an artificial simulation.
What is a knockout like you doing in a computer-generated gin joint like this?
By noting that William Shatner's Kirk has been parodied countless times since his last appearance in Star Trek Generations in 1994 and becoming somewhat of a pop culture icon during that time, we can see why character traits that were once small parts of Kirk's well-rounded character have been exaggerated to create the caricature that we see in the 2009 reboot. One example of this is the fact that the original Kirk was famous for being a womanizer, but it could also be argued that he used this reputation as a tactical ploy to get vital information and further the crew's mission. In the 2009 version, this character trait is exaggerated to the point where he seemingly can't walk past a group of women without visibly turning to check them out. In the original series episode Return to Tomorrow, Kirk delivers the speech,
Risk. Risk is our business. That's what the Starship is all about. That's why we're aboard her.
Despite knowing that their adventures involved an element of risk, he often led the away team on exhibitions, actively putting himself in harm's way and risking his own life rather than the lives of his crew. Of course, you've got to discount the red shirts. This, however, can be contrasted with the actions of Chris Pine's Kirk in Into Darkness when Spock is trapped in an erupting volcano. Kirk violates the Prime Directive, resulting in the Enterprise hurling towards an active volcano, and in doing so disregards not only the safety of his crew, but also the repercussions of them following the orders of a captain who's acting in his own self-interests. Despite being known for his often bizarre improvised fight moves like his famous two-legged kick to the chest or turning himself into a human bowling ball to roll at alien bad guys, it could be argued that the original Kirk only took a life when it was absolutely necessary and took no pleasure in doing so. This can be illustrated by looking at his infamous fight scene with the Gorn in the episode Arena. When forced to fight the captain of the Gorn in a trial by combat, Kirk stops himself from delivering the final blow by gaining an understanding of the Gorn's motivations and being able to humanize these seemingly terrifying aliens. By comparison, in the reboot, Kirk kills countless aliens with seemingly no consequence, even occasionally delivering some sweet one-liners before dispatching them.
What? I got your gun.
As Richard Corliss in the Time article The Young and the Reckless writes, when Pike disciplines Kirk and reminds him that he is meant to be primarily an explorer, not a warrior, it might be the spirit of Gene Roddenberry speaking. And speaking of explorers, Patrick Stewart's Jean-Luc Picard, the captain of the USS Enterprise NCC 1701D, was first seen in the 1987's The Next Generation. Picard differed from Kirk by being more patient and always seeking to find the diplomatic approach to solving conflict. When Shatner and Stewart were interviewed in 1991 and asked how their respective characters would have dealt with the real-life dictator Saddam Hussein, Shatner said that Kirk would have told him to drop dead, and with a response that perfectly illustrates the different styles of the two captains, Stewart responded that Picard would still be talking. Picard's unshakable moral compass and protection of life can be illustrated by the speech that he delivers in the episode The Offspring when trying to protect an android named Lal.
There are times, sir, when men of good conscience cannot blindly follow orders. You acknowledge their sentience, but you ignore their personal liberties and freedom. Order a man to hand this child over to the state, not while I'm his captain.
By putting his own career on the line to protect the life of a sentient android, Picard demonstrates the sanctity he has for life in whatever form it takes. By encouraging Data not to blindly follow Starfleet's orders, Picard shows that his strong ethical stance and moral philosophy outweighs orders that would directly contradict his sense of integrity. Seeing the iconic Borg cube and hearing the line "resistance is futile" is enough to strike fear into the heart of any Star Trek fan. What made them such a worthy adversary to Picard is the Borg collective, with a lack of humanity and individuality, could not be reasoned with and directly clashed with Picard's principles. Interestingly, although the Borg refer to themselves as "we" to reflect their loss of individuality, when Picard is assimilated into Locutus of Borg, he still refers to himself as "I", which suggests that the Borg were never fully able to remove Picard's humanity. When Picard is rescued by the crew, the show focuses on the psychological effects of being assimilated and the philosophical questions of what it means to lose your humanity and sense of self. It could be argued that Picard's measured and thoughtful approach to solving conflict worked much better in the long-form television format than it did when the character crossed over into the more action-orientated Star Trek movie universe. This can be illustrated by looking at the film First Contact, where Picard again faces off with the Borg. When his crew plead with him to abandon the Enterprise, Picard stubbornly refuses to accept defeat.
Tell your men to stand their ground.
Sir.
Fight hand to hand if they have to.
Ordering his men to stand their ground and even fight hand to hand with the much superior Borg. TV version of Picard would have likely listened to Worf when he advised him to retreat, but the version of Picard in First Contact cuts him off with objection noted, and even calls the famously brave and proud Klingon a coward for not wanting to stay and fight.
Everybody out there thinks that staying here and fighting the Borg is suicide.
Picard is warned by Lily, but he replies with,
The crew is accustomed to following my orders.
The reason Picard acts completely out of character in this scene from First Contact is arguably because the filmmakers were awkwardly trying to force Picard into the generic role of action hero so that the film could appeal to a wider audience. By comparing this to Picard on the TV show, it can be argued that they betrayed Picard's collective character, turning him into a kind of corrupt and warmongering leader that Picard himself would have made a stand against. Netflix Star Trek Discovery was released in a television landscape completely unrecognisable to that which gave us the Next Generation. The fact that Netflix is now experimenting with an option that allows shows to be played at 1.5 speed highlights the shift in both attention span and how media is now being ingested in a fast-moving technological landscape. With that in mind, it would be impossible to imagine the Next Generation being released now, with its 26-episode-long opening season and a slow, patient approach to character development that draws comparisons to shows like Deadwood or The Wire. In what could be interpreted as an attempt to constantly keep the audience engaged, Discovery actually relies on flashy camera work, quick editing, and convoluted storylines that makes less sense than a slam poetry night hosted by the Borg. Thank you very much. But it's Discovery's writing and treatment of beloved characters that really illustrates what's been lost in translation. This can be demonstrated by looking at the character of Mr. Spock. In an interview with CBC TV in 1969, Leonard Nimoy described the origin of the iconic Vulcan nerve pinch, a move in which Vulcans could knock someone unconscious by pinching a pressure point on their neck.
And I avoided what I consider physical violence. Cracking people on the head. It was a merciful way of knocking out an enemy.
So in an effort to avoid what he saw as archaic physical violence, Nimoy devised something more peaceful, a merciful way of knocking out an enemy. So with that in mind, there were often scenes of action in Star Trek, but none of the television series revolved entirely around a series of escalating bombastic action set pieces. That's arguably something that J.J. Abrams brought into the franchise in 2009 Star Trek, where an episode of the original series might include a throwaway line or reference to Sulu's skill at fencing. By the 2009 reboot, Sulu is now a backflipping sword-wielding martial artist. And this crowd-pleasing focus on action has carried through to Discovery, itself owing a lot to Abrams' distinctive visual style. But along with that, J.J. Abrams was actually quoted as saying, "I never liked Star Trek when I was a kid. It always felt too philosophical to me." The 2009 reboot was actually conceptualized by the $709 million grossing Transformers writers Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci. As unbelievable as it sounds, someone somewhere watched Transformers and thought, let's give these guys the reins of the Star Trek franchise, which might explain how scenes of diplomatic leadership have been replaced with planets exploding. So the question is, does the future of Star Trek look as bleak and depressing as a Ferengi beauty pageant? A new Star Trek show called Picard is going to be released in January 2020, bringing back the Shakespearean actor Patrick Stewart as an aging Jean-Luc Picard. In an interview with the LA Times, Alex Kurtzman, the co-writer of 2009's Star Trek and the co-creator of Discovery, was quoted as saying, "Picard will be a more philosophical show and a character study." With that in mind, you might go to the trailer of Picard thinking surely the 79-year-old Patrick Stewart won't be in a show as action-packed and dumbed down as Discovery. And then you watch the trailer.
If she is who I think she is, is in serious danger.
For the sake of any fan still there after watching Discovery, let's hope that this trailer is drive levels of false advertising, and that Gene Roddenberry's hopeful and inclusive original idea for Star Trek can once again live long and prosper. Thanks so much to Oscar Wallington, who spent his childhood eating cheese and leek pasties in the shape of a Romulan warbird, for writing this essay. You can follow him at Oscar Wallington. Thanks for watching that video. Please do like and subscribe. We upload 2 tasty and tenderized videos a week to sink your teeth into, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments. Make sure to follow us at Screen On Point and Tom A. Ransom on Twitter to satisfy my narcissistic need for acceptance and love, and you make sure you have a wonderful day.